one really interesting observation that I've made over the past, let's say 15 years is that I specifically try not to use the terms the left and the right kind of because I don't really want to play into a false dichotomy. But when the labels conservative and liberal, they really seem to have switched round in terms of actual meaning. So now a lot of people who call themselves liberal are people who want restrictions on free speech and who think that you should be forced to wear a mask right now, or forced perhaps even to take a vaccine, inject a substance into your body. There people are calling themselves liberal, and they are supporting deplatforming, and they're supporting censorship, and they're shutting down people, and they're promoting intolerance. And then through this whole, weird branch of progressivism, they're actively promoting various forms of racism, sexism, misogyny, homophobia, etc. And I very much feel like in the UK and perhaps even in the USA in 2021, being a liberal is now a conservative position, and so-called liberals, or certainly progressives, in a lot of ways, they're a lot more, dare I say, conservative than the people. There's been this inversion that's happened throughout my lifetime, and I don't know, I guess, one, if you've seen the same thing, and two, how that's happened and what that means.
I have seen exactly the same thing, and I totally agree with you. Fundamentally, you're exactly right on the left-right dichotomy. They're essentially just tribal labels at this point, because exactly as you say, I saw a comment just scrolling through Facebook feed, and someone had just commented, the Conservatives conserve things in the same way that the Labour Party care about workers. And it's like, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. These are just words now. They're not filled with meaning and content, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the fact that you have people calling themselves liberals who are arguing for restrictions on freedoms, and you have the conservative position is now, we are for freedom, we are for it's very interesting how this has turned around. And I think you're completely right about banning left and right, because we should return to a more sort of political science description of what we're dealing with. Because when you say liberal, there is, like, the political scientists infuse that with a kind of content that is lost in the public dialogue because it's just taken to mean left. But the thing is, from the position of someone who is like a doctrinaire leftist, if they're a Marxist, a communist, a socialist, whatever it is, they will tell you that liberalism is a right-wing philosophy because it's built on property rights, and it believes in personal freedom and autonomy and freedom from the state, whereas the socialist or the communist doesn't actually believe that. And so for the fact that for these two people to be incorporated into the sort of, the Democratic Party under, say, AOC and Joe Biden, if they're both sort of representatives of those views, and AOC came out and said this, like, in a sensible country, I wouldn't be in the same party as Joe Biden. It's like, there's no reason that you would be. Why would you be? You don't fundamentally actually believe the same things. And the conservatives themselves, I mean, I don't even know what they think conservatism is at this point. I don't know. I mean, like, watching the British Conservatives put out LGBTQ flags and Black Lives Matter. Like, what are you doing? This is communism that you're promoting in another guise. Why are you doing this? So yeah, I think you're completely right. The language we use to describe politics has become completely muddled. And how useful is that?
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think that the labels are even... Maybe at this stage, sometimes I wonder, do these labels do more harm than good? Do the labels still have real meaning? When people say liberal, conservative, even left, right, and then especially with the internet, because I even think these labels mean somewhat different things from country to country. I don't think the word liberal in the UK means the exact same thing it does in the USA. I don't think the word conservative means the same thing in the USA as in the UK, let alone all the other countries. So I often wonder if maybe we're all, like, anyone who uses these labels, are we maybe sort of just creating even more confusion at this point? Or do you think there's a way that they can even be useful? What would be the best way to even describe politics these days? Does it?
I think that we have to use labels, right? So we have to use labels as a shorthand for a long conversation that we're trying to avoid by just establishing our position, right?
Yeah.
So, you could say, well, I believe in preserving the traditions and culture of England as inherited from the past, and you'd say, okay, well, I'm a conservative, surely, or you are an advocate of individual rights and personal freedoms, and so you can call yourself a liberal, or you're interested in wealth redistribution, so you're a socialist. So you can. I think we can't do without the terms and labels. The problem is, I think that, and I don't know how accidental this has been, I think there might have been a deliberate attempt to essentially conceal the nature of certain ideologies within others. For example, the liberal, and this is, I think, the real fundamental crux of any problem that we've come to in Western Enlightenment thought, is the origin of rights. The liberal, the classical liberal, and the conservative will have a different but similar view on where rights come from. The conservative is more likely to be religious and will say, well, rights are imbued in us by God. The liberal is more likely to be scientifically minded and will say, well, our rights are natural and inherited from nature. And then the socialist will say our rights are constructed by the state.
Yes.
And that's interesting because that's a very different paradigm. The liberal and the conservative, very overlapping. Whether you think God created nature or you think it was a natural process that came out of the Big Bang or whatever theory you have of it, if you believe that rights are intrinsic to us, then you can't create new rights. The rights are what the rights are, and what we need to do is preserve and protect them. Whereas if you're a socialist, you can create new rights all day because what you're actually talking about is an entitlement. You're talking about the state providing through taxpayer money and the labor that they hire with it, a service. And it could be a universal service, a mandatory service. It could be any kinds of things. But the point is, it's not intrinsic to you. And so our concept of rights, we use the term rights all the time, every day of our lives. And we don't have a clear understanding of it. And when you realize that you've got these two contradictory opinions that are operating and circulating in political discourse, you realize that actually that's the conversation we need to have, because that has to be sorted out. Because I'm actually completely in favor. I'm a liberal, a sort of classical liberal, but I do see the pragmatic benefit of having something like a social safety net, a universal healthcare system, things like this. And I do agree that they can be created and constructed as entitlements. So as citizens, we can grant these entitlements to ourselves because we think they're useful. But that doesn't make them rights. Anything that requires someone else's labor, by my definition as a liberal, isn't a natural right, and therefore isn't a right at all. Because at the end of the day, really, if the system broke down, then you'd see that your rights are definitely not what is constructed by the state. But also, it gives the state the position that God and nature occupy in these other philosophies.
Yes.
And I think that's where the totalitarian catastrophes of the 20th century lie. I think they spring directly from that idea and come out as fascism, communism, and socialism. And it's not to say that the people who occupy this, what I'm just call sort of the continental mindset of the rights being constructed by the state, it's not that these are bad people. I just think they are deeply misled and they haven't really interrogated these ideas thoroughly.
I do not scam. Put some respect on my name.